They cuffed her into a cell. The Deathworld girl went quiet, but they never walked out. The cuffs released with a sound like a small exhale, and nothing moved. That was the part Thren Voss would think about later in the archive, standing in front of a sealed case with warm light on a cracked spine. Not what she said, not what the readout showed. The sound of the mechanism letting go, and then the 8 seconds of nothing that followed when the cell stayed quiet, and the air pressure held at 1 bar, and the body in cell 3 did not collapse, did not gasp, did not do any of the 17 things his training had prepared him to manage. 8 seconds. Then she opened her eyes. She had been in that cell for 39 hours. Sigma 11's endurance evaluation protocol had designed those 39 hours to be categorically unsurvivable. The human cadet, Kira, the intake manifest said, 19 years old, cooperative on arrival, had not been extracted, had not lost consciousness, had not gone chalk-white or resonance panicked or folded her body inward until her sensory organs were flush against her torso. She had, by every biometric measure available, rested. No gasp, no disorientation, no hands out for balance. She reached for the cloth-bound journal at her side, smoothed the cover once with her thumb where something was pressed between its pages, and sat with it in her lap. The lights in the cell had come back to full output, 800 lumens, standard post-evaluation restoration. She didn't squint. Thren's jaw glands had gone dark 7 minutes ago. He was still watching the monitor. She was still watching, nothing in particular. What happened next, I wish I could say it ended there. Stay close. 39 hours earlier, Thren Voss had reviewed the intake manifest at 3:12 hours, and his coffee substitute had gone cold before he noticed. This was not unusual. Sigma 11's containment platform kept its own hours, and those hours did not much care what he preferred to be doing. The cylindrical facility turned slowly in neutral sector space, its internal pressure held at 0.2 bar above standard, which Thren had stopped noticing somewhere around day 3 of his 11-day tenure. The weight was just the air now. The slight compression behind his orbital ridge was just how breathing felt here. His jaw glands pulsed amber. They had pulsed amber since day 1, which he told himself was the new posting, the new pressure calibration, the ordinary alertness of a warden who took his facility seriously. He had served at 4 lower classification facilities before this. He had reviewed dozens of intake manifests at odd hours. He was precise, methodical, and as his last 3 supervisors had noted in their assessments, reliably calm. The amber was just his body keeping records. It didn't mean anything was wrong. The manifest listed 6 cadets incoming for the standard 39-hour cycle. 5 species, 6 individuals. Transport arrival had logged at 22:14 hours. Processing was complete. Each cadet had been biometrically scanned, stripped of non-essential equipment, and placed in one of the 7 evaluation cells. Cell assignments ran 1 through 6. Cell 7 remained empty, as it usually did. Thren read through each entry in sequence. Cell 1, Thren female, 22, intake biometrics nominal. Chest plate resonance structures within standard range. Resting frequency, 41 BPM. Pressure tolerance logged, 1.4 bar functional with documented degradation above that threshold. Cell 2, Orith male, 31, apex predator neurology classification. Exoskeletal plating noted on intake scan. Compound eye visual acuity in expected range. Pressure tolerance, 1.6 bar maximum before documented unconsciousness risk. Cell 3, human female. Age 19. Intake officer's biometric notes were standard. Heart rate 58, respiration normal, no signs of psychological distress on arrival. Below the standard fields in script that was slightly smaller than the rest, slightly less certain, brought a journal. Thren looked at that for a moment. The journal itself was logged 2 lines below. Personal effect, non-tactical, cloth-bound, water-stained cover. Contents reviewed, handwritten text, non-encoded. 1 pressed botanical item between pages described as petal, violet-edged. Returned to cadet per standard personal effect protocol. He moved to cell 4. Thren male, 19, chest plate resonance, same profile as cell 1 essentially. These 2 had arrived together. The intake officer had noted they were from the same regional cohort, which was not relevant to the evaluation, but which explained why they had stood close together in the processing line. The Thren habit of physical proximity under stress already surfacing before a single stressor had been applied. Cells 5 and 6. Vexrol pair, both 24. Retractable spinal structures, sensory withdrawal capable. Their pressure tolerance dropped sharply once they entered retracted state, 0.8 bar active capacity when fully withdrawn versus 1.3 bar in alert posture. The intake forms for both noted in identical phrasing that they had not spoken during processing. Thren closed the manifest. The endurance evaluation protocol had been running at Sigma 11 for longer than the facility's current command structure had been alive. It was not a punitive measure. That was important to understand, and Thren had understood it since his initial classification training, 6 facilities and 11 years ago. The protocol existed because the Academy needed to know with precision how each species responded to compounding stress, pressure escalation, thermal variation, sensory isolation, postural constraint, applied in sequence in controlled increments over 39 hours with medical extraction protocols ready at every phase threshold. No cadet in Sigma 11's history had been extracted past hour 40. They extracted themselves in the technical sense. Their physiology reached its measurable limit, and their body provided the signal. Unconsciousness, dissociation, involuntary vocalization. The medical team was fast, the post-evaluation care was thorough, and every extracted cadet went on to complete Academy certification through alternative assessment pathways. The protocol measured where the limit was. It did not punish the limit's existence. Thren refiled the manifest and began his first monitoring pass. By hour 8, the Markov cadet in Cell 4. He had misread the cell assignments on first review. The Markov was in 4, not a Thren had gone chalk white. This was expected. Markov physiology used pigmentation as a stress indicator. Under elevated pressure and thermal cycling, melanin-responsive cells hyperactivated, producing the opacity loss that looked alarming to outside observers but was well documented in the Academy's species response literature. The cadet was conscious, responding to verbal check-in with single-syllable acknowledgments, but his visual acuity had degraded significantly. Thren logged the observation at 8:20, noted that the cadet met the threshold for medical observation tier, and flagged the file yellow. Medical observation did not mean extraction. It meant closer monitoring. Cell 3's biometrics remained green. Heart rate 56 BPM. Respiration, slow cycle, no stress cortisol elevation. The biometric suite had no yellow flags for Kira's file, which Thren noted and filed, and did not think about further. By hour 9, the Thren male in Cell 4, he had confirmed the assignments now. The Thren pair were in Cells 1 and 4, had reached resonance panic. This was also expected, earlier than some cycle averages but within the documented range. Thren chest plate structures amplified stress signals through involuntary frequency elevation. 40 beats per minute at rest, 60 under mild pressure. At hour 9, the monitoring suite registered 190 BPM, which was the point at which the frequency became self-reinforcing, the sound of the escalating resonance itself adding to the panic it expressed. The extraction team had him out within 4 minutes. The Thren female in Cell 1 lasted until hour 9 and 40 minutes. 5 cells down, 1 still green. Thren logged both extractions, tagged their files for post-evaluation medical review, and returned to his monitoring station. His jaw glands were still amber. The amber was slightly brighter than it had been at 3:12. He did not record that. The Vexrol pair in Cells 5 and 6 went into full retraction at hour 11. Their biometric signals dropped sharply as their sensory organs withdrew. Heart rate down, pressure tolerance down, the monitoring suite shifting from green to a pale cautionary orange that wasn't quite a flag, but wasn't an all-clear either. They were physically alive and physiologically stable in the narrow sense, but the retraction state was documented as a stress response. And once the spines had flushed against the torso and the sensory structures had folded inward, there was no easy way to assess their psychological condition. The medical team moved them to observation at hour 12. Not an extraction, technically, a precautionary transfer. Cell 3 was green. Thren ran a manual biometric cross-check at hour 13. The suite showed the same readings it had shown at intake. Heart rate, 56. Respiration, slow cycle. Cortisol, within normal resting parameters. The cell temperature was currently degrees C, passing through the thermal cycling phase. The pressure had climbed to 1.3 bar. The arm-back restraints had been active since hour 1. He ran the cross-check again, same results. He logged an entry, Cell 3 nominal, manual verification completed. No anomalies. He did not log that he had run the cross-check twice. Hour 14, standard welfare check. Thren keyed the intercom for Cell 3, a brief, 2-tone signal to indicate active monitoring, and followed it with a standard status request. Cadet confirmed status. He expected silence. Most cadets at hour 14 were either unresponsive or capable only of monosyllabic acknowledgement. The cognitive load of sustained pressure and cold and restraint-induced discomfort consumed most available bandwidth. Language required overhead. At hour 14, most overhead was gone. A pause, longer than the reflex it should have prompted. Then unhurried. Would the temperature be increasing at any point? I'm finding it a little challenging to hold heat. Thren's joglands flared. The thermal readout for cell 3 showed degrees C, dropping toward the minus 28 degrees C target. This was 14 degrees below the threshold at which most species lost fine motor coordination. The Orith cadet had gone unconscious at hour 11 when cell temperature hit degrees C. The Threnni pair had been resonance panicking before the thermal phase fully activated. She had asked a question with 2 subordinate clauses. She had used the word challenging, which implied she had access to a scale of difficulty with gradations above and below it, and had placed her current experience at a specific point on that scale. She had said a little, which was a modifier, which required a second cognitive operation layered on top of the primary assessment. Temperature will continue to drop through hour 18, Thren said. His voice was steady. The amber in his joglands was not. All right, she said, thank you. He sat with that for a moment after the intercom closed. Thank you. He logged verbal response produced at hour 14. Multi-clause construction. Non-standard. Filed under anomalous behavioral adaptation. No immediate action required. He did not call for equipment diagnostics. Equipment diagnostics required documentation. Documentation required explanation. He was not ready to explain what he would write in that field. Hour 15 produced a second anomaly, quieter than the first. Thren had been running passive visual monitoring on Cell 3's conduct feed, a routine check, the kind he did for all active cells on a rotating basis, though Cell 3 was the only one still active. He had been monitoring for approximately 4 minutes when he registered something wrong with the image. He looked closer. Kira had the journal open. The restraint anchors fixed the arm at a 40-degree rearward angle from the shoulder joint, which was designed to prevent cadets from adopting comfortable postures. It created a low, continuous pull on the shoulder socket that compounded over hours into the kind of muscle fatigue that made the body feel larger than its volume. Most cadets, by hour 15, were not using their hands for anything deliberate. Their hands hung at the angle the anchor dictated, and that was where they stayed. Kira had found a configuration. She was holding the journal open with her fingers against the lower edge, both hands tilted inward at an angle that should have been biomechanically impractical given the anchor geometry. The journal rested against her forearms. She was reading. The cell's single emergency lighting strip provided 4 lumens of output, standard rating for life safety visibility in total blackout conditions, not for text resolution. Thren's species required 60 lumens minimum for reliable reading. He had no documented data for human visual acuity under low-light conditions, but 4 lumens was 4 lumens, and what she was doing with it was not consistent with any documented visual threshold he had on file. She was not squinting. She was reading by 4 lumens in a minus 19 C cell at hour 15, under 40-degree restraint geometry, with her biometrics still showing resting parameters, and she had turned a page. Thren logged anomalous motor adaptation. Cadet appears to be reading personal effect item cloth journal, lighting conditions below documented text resolution threshold for recorded species types. No distress indicators. He paused. He added, posture appears stable. He moved the cursor to the next field. He stayed there for a moment. He closed the log entry. Hour 18 came at 20:30. All cells went dark simultaneously, a hard cut from emergency strip to 0, the blackout phase initiating on schedule. This was Sigma 11's primary psychological instrument, not the pressure which accumulated slowly, not the cold which was measurable and could be braced against. The darkness was the thing that most species found genuinely hard to hold, because most nervous systems could find some way to adapt to physical constraint, but the removal of all spatial reference, all sense of boundary, of where the self ended and the cell began, produced a specific type of cognitive distress that had been documented across 41 of the 47 species in the Academy's classification range. The other 6 had not been tested. The Vexral were capable of sensory withdrawal that arguably made darkness less threatening, but the Vexral had already retracted before hour 12. 91% of non-human cadets showed measurable dissociation markers within 4 hours of total blackout. Elevated stress hormones, disrupted spatial orientation, involuntary vocalization, not screaming, not usually, but the sounds that come out of a body when the body has stopped deciding what sounds to make. Thren sat in his monitoring station and watched the blank feed from Cell 3. The biometric panel was the only thing with data now. Heart rate, 55 BPM. Respiration, slow cycle. Cortisol within normal resting parameters. Microtremor index, 0.3, a slight uptick from earlier, still well within normal range. 3 hours passed. He refilled his coffee substitute at hour 20. It was too warm, which he noticed and did not much care about. He was watching the biometric panel. Heart rate, 54 BPM. At hour 22, the biometric suite flagged Cell 3 yellow. Not the extraction alert red that had lit 5 times tonight, the red that meant get the medical team on standby and begin the post-evaluation protocol. Yellow, elevated endurance markers. Monitoring continued. Thren set down the coffee substitute. He pulled up Cell 3's biometric history from the beginning of the cycle. He ran it forward in time, watching the numbers the way you watch a long, slow thing move when you are waiting for it to do something unexpected. It did not do anything unexpected. That was the problem. At hour 1, intake baseline. Heart rate 58, cortisol at standard resting level. At hour 6, pressure at 0.8 bar above baseline. Heart rate 56, cortisol unchanged. At hour 12, thermal phase fully engaged. Degrees C, heart rate 55, cortisol at 97% of intake baseline. At hour 18, blackout phase active. Heart rate 55, cortisol at 96% of intake baseline. At hour 22, in complete darkness, in a degrees C pressurized cell, restrained to a wall anchor, 22 hours into a psychological endurance evaluation, designed to be categorically unsurvivable past the 30-hour mark. The biometric suite had recalibrated its yellow flag. The new data read, stress cortisol output 8% below intake baseline, heart rate 54 BPM, respiration slow cycle. Microtremor index, 0.1 within standard sleep parameters. Thren stared at the panel. He looked at the microtremor index, 0.1. The documented sleep threshold for most species was 0.2 or below. The standard sleep threshold for humans, he pulled the species file because he had not needed to consult it before tonight, was listed as 0 to 0.3, depending on sleep phase. She was asleep, not resting, not in a stress-dampened state. The data said she had achieved metabolic rest. In a degrees C pressurized blackout cell, restrained to a wall anchor, 22 hours into the protocol, with her cortisol 8% below where it had been when she walked through the intake door. Thren's jaw glands went dark. Not amber, not the cautious, alert glow he had been wearing since day one. Dark. A shutdown his physiology only ran when the inputs it was processing stopped fitting any category it had been built to hold. His body did not have a label for what the panel was showing him. It was doing the only thing it could do, which was stop producing a signal and restart. He had not run diagnostics yet. He had been going to run them at hour 24. He looked at the panel. He looked at the microtremor reading. He looked at the timestamp. He pulled up the diagnostics menu and did not click it. He told himself he would run them at hour 24. The data would still be there at hour 24. The suite would still be functioning at hour 24, or it wouldn't be, and either answer would tell him something. He told himself this, and then he sat in the dark monitoring station with the panel glowing in front of him, and his jaw glands stayed dark. And outside the viewport, the neutral sector moved at the pace that space moved, which was no pace at all. The panel showed her heart rate, 54 beats per minute. Slow, regular. The rhythm of something that had decided the night was for sleeping and had gone ahead and done that. The panel still showed 54 beats per minute when Thren ran the first diagnostic at hour 24. The suite was functioning within normal parameters. All sensors verified. All readouts consistent. Everything the machine was telling him was true, and what it was telling him was that a 19-year-old human cadet had been asleep in a minus 26 degrees C pressurized blackout cell for 6 hours, and her heart rate had dropped 2 beats per minute since she started. Thren closed the diagnostic report. He ran it again at hour 28, same results. The thing about Sigma-11 was that it had been designed to be certain. The facility existed to produce certainty about limits, about thresholds, about where each species met its edge and what that edge looked like. The protocol was certain. The facility was certain. Thren had been certain, 11 days into his posting, amber glow and all. Hour 28. He logged the second diagnostic results and sat back. 54 beats per minute. His jaw glands had been dark since hour 22. Not the cautious amber that had been his baseline since arrival, but the flat, deep null of a system that had run out of category to file something under. his own face in the monitor's reflection, recording an absence. 3 more hours before the protocol reached its theoretical ceiling. At hour 31, he called the supervisor. Selen was a Grevath, dense, rust-colored cranial plates, the kind of careful voice that came from years of managing situations where careful voices were the primary tool. She had reviewed his documentation twice in 11 days and approved it both times without changes. Selen, he kept his voice even, the human in cell 3. A pause, go ahead. Her metrics haven't moved in 9 hours. He heard a terminal being pulled up, a few seconds of quiet. Equipment fault. Thren had run diagnostics at hours 24 and 28. The suite was functioning within normal parameters. All sensors verified. He said this in the flat, factual way his training had given him for moments when the facts were the most unsettling part. Another pause, longer. Has she spoken? Once, at hour 14, she asked if the temperature would increase. The line stayed open. He could hear the particular silence of someone looking at data they did not have a folder for. He recognized it because he had been producing that silence himself for 9 hours. Keep monitoring, Selen said. Her voice was still careful, still professional, but the certainty that had been underneath every instruction she had ever given him was gone, present in the words, absent in the tone, a gap he had not heard from her before. Understood, he said. He put the comm down. He straightened the intake manifest on the desk before he did it, though it did not need straightening. It was already straight. He was aware of his hands doing this and chose not to examine why. Hour 32, hour 33. The pressure climbed through 1.7 bar, then 1.8. The cell was still dark. The conduct feed showed nothing but a shape against a wall, indistinct still. The panel showed 54 beats per minute. He had stopped looking away from it. There was a thought that had been forming since hour 22 that he had been refusing to put into language. He could feel the shape of it. It had the weight of a thing that changes the meaning of everything around it once you say it out loud. The protocol had been designed to test cadets. It could only measure what it was built to measure, the elevated cortisol, the elevated heart rate, the microtremor escalation, the spatial disorientation that came out as involuntary sound and lost motor control. It had been built on one assumption, that all sapient life shared the same basic architecture: fear response, spatial disorientation, pressure cortisol cascade. Applied correctly, for the right duration, those stressors would find the limit of anything that thought. The thought finished forming. The protocol was not measuring her. It never had been. It had been running its sequence on a nervous system that had come from somewhere the sequence was not designed to find. The yellow flag at hour 22 had not been an alert about Kira. It had been the system flagging itself. Thren's jaw glands stayed dark. He did not log this thought. There was no field in the evaluation documentation, for the evaluation has misidentified its own subject. Hour 35, somewhere between 35 and 36, Thren ate a compressed protein ration standing at the monitoring station. He had stopped tasting them around day 8. He ate it watching the panel. The panel kept producing the same number, steady and unhurried, like a clock that had decided what time it was and saw no reason to change. He thought about the journal. He had logged it at 3:12 as a personal effect, non-tactical, cloth-bound. He had returned it per protocol without thinking. He had not thought about it again until the conduct feed at hour 15, her reading it at 4 lumens under 40-degree restraint geometry, in a -19, C cell, turning a page. She had brought one thing. Everything else had been confiscated and audited. The journal had been reviewed, logged, and returned. Small oversight, automatic compliance. He had done it without thinking, the way you do things that have always been done. She had known it would be returned. She had packed exactly one item the intake protocol would give back to her. She had assessed the situation before she walked through the door and decided what she would need for 39 hours in the dark, and she had been right. He did not know why this landed with the weight it did. She was 19 and she had packed a journal. That was a small thing, a quiet thing, the kind of preparation that only looked unremarkable until you understood what it was preparation for. The protocol had been designed to find the limit of anything that breathed. It had been designed to test, to measure, to prove that pressure applied correctly in the right sequence for the right duration could reach the edge of anything that thought. Thren had believed this for 11 years across 4 facilities. He had believed it the way you believe the building you are standing in, not actively, not with effort, just because the floor holds and the walls stay where they belong. The floor was shifting, not dramatically, slowly. The way a thing shifts when the data under it has been quietly wrong for 9 hours, and you have run 2 diagnostics and called your supervisor, and the numbers have not moved. Hour 38, he ran a third diagnostic. The suite was functioning within normal parameters. Hour 39 arrived at 5:34. The protocol's final phase, a 60-minute hold at maximum parameters, 1.9 bar, minus 28 degrees C, full blackout, full restraint, the theoretical ceiling. Every species in the classification range had been extracted before this point, or at it, or had been monitored through the final minutes, and extracted at the 60-minute mark showing physiological distress consistent with sustained extreme stress. Cell 3 showed 54 beats per minute. Thren initiated the end phase protocol. His hands did the sequence without him. He had done it 17 times across 4 facilities. Pressure normalization, 1.9 bar dropping toward 1. Thermal restoration, minus 28, C rising toward 18 degrees C. Cuff release, remote trigger both anchor points simultaneously. The sound the cuffs made was a small mechanical exhale, like something that had been holding on, letting go. He had heard that sound 17 times. This was the 18th. The mechanical specificity of it, the small, clean finality of a constraint releasing, was the same as always and completely different. The lights restored. 800 lumens flooding cell 3 from the ceiling strip. Nothing moved. 6 seconds, 7, 8. Kira opened her eyes. No rapid blink. No hand raised against the light. No postural collapse. She opened her eyes the way a person opens their eyes when they have been asleep and the morning has come and they have decided to be awake now. She reached for the journal. She smoothed the cover once with her thumb at the spot where the spine had creased from years of handling, where the violet petal was a faint shadow between pages. She sat with it in her lap, then she stood. She rolled her shoulders once, twice, the slow rotation of a person whose body remembers itself without being reminded. She picked up the journal, held it loosely at her side, and walked to the cell door. Thren opened it. She was standing in the outer corridor, not braced against a wall, not blinking, standing the way you stand when you have somewhere to be and are waiting for whatever comes next. "Is there tea?" she said, "or something close?" Not urgency, an inquiry. The tone of someone making conversation. Thren's jawgland stayed dark. He became aware of several things at once. That she was looking at him with mild, patient interest. That he had no idea what his face was doing. That the panel behind him still showed 54 beats per minute on a screen no one was watching anymore. "There is," he said finally. "Down the hall, left at the secondary junction." "Thank you," she said. She walked toward the junction. Quiet, even footsteps. He stood in the open cell doorway for a while after she turned the corner and the corridor was empty again. By 900, 3 things had happened without announcement. No memo, no meeting. The system rewrote itself the way pressurized systems do when they find something they cannot contain, quietly, efficiently, closing around an inconsistency. First, Sigma 11's operational manual was flagged for mandatory review. Second, the Endurance Evaluation Protocol was reclassified from Universal Cadet Protocol to Species Conditional Application, humans exempted, pending Independent Standards Review. The replacement standard field sat blank, marked pending. Third, Selen submitted a transfer request to a lower classification facility in a quieter sector. Thren saw it in the personnel system at 10:30. He looked at it for a moment. He did not comment on it. He closed the file. He sat in the monitoring station where he had spent the night. The last readings were still on the panel because he had not closed that file either. 54 beats per minute. Cortisol, 8% below intake baseline. He closed it. 6 weeks later, Thren arrived at Station Carthren on a Tuesday, when the archive sector was empty. The archive of unclassified responses, Sector 14, was smaller than he had imagined. 14 permanent cases along 2 walls, low lighting. Temperature-controlled air with the faint mineral smell of preservation systems running at careful, constant output. The journal was in the 3rd case from the left. It rested in its sealed housing, low pressure, temperature held at 19 degrees C. The case lighting was warm and direct, angled to catch the worn spine at the tilt that made the creasing visible. The violet petal sat between pages, a faint shadow, exactly as it had been at 3:12 on the morning he had logged it and returned it and thought nothing of it. The plaque below read, Personal Effect, Human Cadet NF07 Sigma 11 Cycle 12, Endurance Evaluation Record, 39 HRS 51 Min UNEXTRACTED. Class a Behavioral Stabilization Artifact, Species Reclassification Pending. He stood in front of the case for a long time. He stood, he looked. He did not reach for anything. His jaw glands were still. Not amber, not dark, still. A third state he had not thought to name before. Somewhere out there was a world that had made her find cold a minor inconvenience and darkness a good climate for resting. A world that had produced a nervous system the Academy's best instruments could not find the ceiling of. He was trying very hard not to think about what else that world had made. He turned and walked back down the corridor. He did not look back at the case. Back at Sigma 11, the blank field in the Classification Division's registry sat open on a terminal in an office no one had been assigned to yet. Human Cadet Endurance Assessment, Independent Standard, Pending Development. No one had filled it. No one knew what to put there. At night, Thren left his light on. He told himself it was a warden's habit. The corridor outside his quarters was quiet. The facility's pressure held at 0.2 bar above standard, the weight of it steady in the air, in the slow expansion of his chest on every breath. He did not think too hard about what other wardens had stopped doing.